Alright, so here's a quick look at how to save an animation in Dog Waffle PD Pro 8.2. And in fact, I'll show first of all how to create something a little bit different. Zoom out a little bit here and simply create an animation. Let's say from the animation menu, create 30 frames is the default. That will be just fine for this demo. And what I'll do is I'll use the curve tool, which is this little curvy arc, and I'll create just a couple of points here. Let's create one here, just a couple. After 4 points it starts to go into a smooth curve, and I'll close it. There's a close button here, this one here, and I can grab these points and move them around. And so what I'd like to do is do a little butterfly shape, so maybe something like this. I guess I have the wrong number of points here, but that's okay. Oh, got one more here. So let's animate this, and we do that by going to the rotor tools and recording a keyframe here. And I want this animation to be looping, so I'll go to the very last frame and set the keyframe there again. So we now have a duplicate copy at the end and at the beginning, and then we can go perhaps a different shape at this point and at this point along the timeline. So I'll set it to here, move this point, let's say up here, this point down here, this thing, I don't know, let's create something wacky like so, and keyframe that, right? Create keyframe, and then one more, because right now we can interpolate here, but let's do one more. Let's kind of flip it sideways. Let's move this one over here and this there. I don't know what's going to happen when we render that, but let's see. All right, another keyframe, and we have 4 keyframes now. And as you scrub through that, you can see every once in a while it shows right there keyframe, and that's indicating that we have hit one of those 4 keyframes, one at the end, one at the bottom, and so on. So what you can do now is you can render whatever your current brush is. You can stroke it along that path, and to do that you can click on more, and let's see right there, stroke and animated curve. You can actually use these control points with in a different way. This is sort of a spline curve that goes through the points. That's the Catmull ROM spline, but there is also a B spline where the points you entered are sort of the scaffolding control points around it. Whichever you like better, let's go with this and stroke an animated curve along that. So the current brush is going to be rendered along that frame for frame, and you see now this little animation being created into the frames. We can close this. We can go out of the curve tool, maybe back to the regular brush tool, and we can scrub through that, and we can see the animation that this has left. And so if you play it, click on the play tool here, you see that it's doing a nice little looping animation. In fact, it kind of seems to pause very briefly. The last frame is identical to the first because we had the keyframes being identical there too. So we could potentially even delete one frame here and it would still be good. But let's not do that quite yet, because one thing that we want to look at now is how to save this. Let's hold on a second. And we're back. So one way to save it, normally when you save an image you could go to the file menu, and there's all sorts of ways, the general file converter, a couple of save options and exports and so on. But these are for just the current frame, single images. Whereas if you're dealing with the animation and you want to save the whole animation, you go to the animation menu. Now one thing that you can do is you save it here, right there, first option for saving, the third one from the top down. That one is a save into what we call the DWA format, Dog Waffle Animation format. So what I'll do is I'll go up to a place where I want that saved. I'll create a folder for it, and let's call this demo 2, and double click, go into that. So I have a folder and I'm going to save this file here. This is like in PD format. Right? And it will get the automatic extension .dwa. So the PD format is pretty quick. As you can see, it didn't ask any more questions. It's a quick memory dump on a file, and it usually is one of the fastest way to save. This is what I recommend for incrementally doing a quick save, and while you're working on it and you have some sort of a log of different stages of the animation. But it is very it is not compressed, and it will consume a lot of disk space. So be careful not to run out of disk space if you have too many of them accumulating. The other couple of ways to save is that you can save it as an AVI, and you can also save the image, the frame sequence here, as an image sequence. Let's look at both. Saving AVI first. When you save to AVI, you'll have to choose what is the playback speed, the frames per second here, because once it's written into an AVI file, unless you have a special tool in which you can sort of ignore and override it, it will need to know at what speed these frames need to be played. So here in DogWaffle, you might be looking at them at 24 frames a second or at some others. But at that point now, you need to decide what is it that you want the default playback speed to be for this file once it's written down. And so here too, we'll get to choose where we want to save that. Let's go to this. I think I was actually already on that folder. There it is, demo 2, and I'll call this one my AVI 1. Let's give it a number 1, and oops, and that's a little bit too low to capture it, so there it is. So my AVI 1, save that, and of course we're not done. We need to actually, this just indicated the path and the file name. We need to also indicate what compression codec to use, and it will ask us the moment we save it. So let's go click on save, and here it is. It will ask us what codec do we want to use. Let's try, for instance, XVID, and save that. Now, one thing I always recommend before moving on is to verify that what you've just saved can also be played back, and when you click show, it will use whatever your default media player is for an AVI file. So from one PC to another, this might be different depending on how it's being configured. Most of the time this will default to the Windows Movie Player. So let's click on show, and sure enough, we've got that. Now, one thing you'll notice is that it may do a little flicker at the very end. There's actually one frame that's black, and I believe that's a side effect of having chosen the XVID format. And I'm not sure exactly why it does that, but it's not something that we have in our original animation. And so it's something, you know, not all codecs are going to behave exactly the same way. You can see the original did not have that black frame. And in fact, if you save it to other AVI formats, let's say we say instead of AVI 1, we call this AVI 2, and we'll save it again, and it's going to ask us once more what video compression do we want, what codec. Let's say I'm using Lagarif in this case, or maybe Cinepack, or any of the others. Let's take Lagarif, lossless, and I'll save it there. Pretty quick. It's actually a nicely compressed file too, not as compressed as XVID, but at least it's not losing the information. And wait, I think I just dismissed this, so I need to do that one more time, because I should have played on show. Maybe it remembers the most recently saved. Let's do that. No, so I need to save it right there. Let's choose Lagarif. This time it's gonna say okay, done, and we can go and play it. So now it's no longer showing that black flash, no longer has a dark frame, and so that's, I think it's something that we see sometimes with XVID. So that talks about it, that completes it about AVI. Now there is one more format, and that's the image sequence. So when you go to image sequence, you'll basically indicate a folder where you want those images, a bunch of files to be saved to. And I'm already in that folder, so that's good. All you gotta do now is basically specify the base file name. So for instance, you'll say frames, and then maybe you can indicate that that's Targa or TGA. And then I don't know, that's it. Basically it will add a number sequence to that, like 01, 02, 03, and so on, and then finish it with a .tga. Now you have a couple of other formats you can save, but let's use the default Targa. In fact, that's different from this other Targa. There's a Targa here, and a bunch of these here will go through a different export mechanism than our default Targa. So the default Targa is what I recommend. If you can work with that, it's the faster one. It's probably going to work best. So let's go save that. And the next thing we can do is to re-import that to make sure we have indeed those images saved properly. You know, again, I would first also have saved it with the animation save option. And let's say what else we can do in terms of save sequence. We could, so when we do that, we actually are still in that same folder. We can see all the files that have been created. Windows will let you see them in different ways, but it doesn't know, Windows doesn't know what a Targa file is, or I mean, it doesn't know how to display the icon for it, the thumbnail. It will just show whatever icon of the application. This one's earphone view. It's going to show the icon of the application associated with a TGA file, and on your system that might be something totally different. So let's go perhaps have a look at what other formats we can use. JPEG, but that's not lossless. That is a lossy format, but it's still an option. You know, sometimes it's fairly adequate. So let's go and call that one not frames TGA, but let's call it frames JPEG. Right, and maybe also have an underscore here. Although we might add that in addition to the number sequence that's going to follow. Now there's one more thing for JPEG. It asks us also for the quality of the JPEG compression, and then you go. Now you can see that this is a much slower save, and there's a couple of reasons for that. For one, it's not our own native code. It's using, I don't know if it's using GDI or ImageMagick, but it is not the optimal save format. And you'll see that the same with the other formats we can save to here. So if you go and save the sequence in yet another format, instead of JPG, JPEG, let's say we use PNG or TIFF, BMP. Let's try BMP. That one might be a little bit faster, but let's find out. Okay, here we go. Let's go change that. And by the way, the reason why I'm using putting that BMP in there is that I can easily later sort them and see all of the frames that are in BMP format, and then after that see all of the frames that are in JPEG format, and then after that all of those that are in Targa format. So they stay in a group, and it'll be easier to reselect if I want to re-import that sequence right here. But right now let's do that. Yeah, no, it's not much faster than in JPEG, so it's about the same, and I think they all go through the conversion either with GDI plus. I suspect not. I think it would be faster actually than this, but that may vary. That experience may vary on your system. In my case, I definitely see a much better performance with Targa. So what do we do when we want to reload those? You go to the animation menu and say load sequence, right, and navigate to the folder. Here on the left pane you got the folder where your images are going to be found. Let's go down to my daily dose and 8.2, and there's my demo 2 folder. And so now here is where it's handy if you had actually in the file name already indicated the BMP part for all of the bitmap files, because then that way they stay grouped together, frames BMP. Later you got frames JPEG if you also saved it out to JPEG, right? And then you see the number sequence that's added to it. It includes an extra underscore. We added an underscore at the end, but the save mechanism adds one more because it doesn't know if you had one there, and it wants to keep it separate and easier to read those numbers separate from the rest of the core of the file name. So now here you see at the bottom the TGA files. There's also my AVI that I saved, and so by default the wildcard here show me everything, but you can go and select for instance show me only the bitmap files, and it's going to show you the BMP files. But even if you see them all files here, it's really easy to say reload just the JPEG sequence. So you get the JPEG, you can select them like this, just click and drag. Or let's say you want the Targa files, those are going to load really quickly, right? Because there's no need to convert. Our importer is essentially a native Targa loader, and if you give us a different format like a JPEG or BMP, we convert those to Targa. At least if we go through ImageMagick. Now there may be other cases, and with GDI plus, actually I don't know what the name is exactly, but with the GDI based imports it might go a little bit faster. than with ImageMagick, but still the very fastest that I've seen is with the native Targa. So once you've done that, you can select the images and load the selected, and this will replace the current animation and it loads it back in. Now you saw that this went in pretty quickly, but it's not the fastest way. The fastest way to load an animation typically, and also to save it, is to save it in this native DWA format. So let's perhaps conclude with that. Let's go and open this DWA I had saved initially, that was saved in PD format, and boom, it's already done. You can see that's really fast. Even if I need to allocate memory, let's say if I free the animation, right, and I really have only one, and in fact I just paint over it all over, whatever, make a different size. Let's go resample half size. So I'm in a totally different space now, and let's go back to the animation and open that animation that I had saved initially. Let's see how quickly that loads. Boom, done. Right. So as a working format, the DWA format is really recommended. It's fast, it's lossless, uncompressed, it's voracious in memory on disk space, but it's going to get you, it will get the job done much less faster. And only once you're done with the whole work and you want to save it out to another format that can be used by other applications, integrated into your nonlinear video editing program, that sort of thing. Only at that point should you worry about AVI and codec, or save it out to BMP or Targa or something like that. All right, hope this was useful, and thanks for watching.